Good morning, everyone, and welcome to session number 6 of our conference titled The Syrian Druze from the 1925 Revolt to 2025 Challenges. We are honored to have with us here today a roundtable of discussion, which promises to be both historically rich and deeply relevant to the contemporary issues. I am joined with my colleague and friend who will serve with me as a co-chair of this panel, Dr. Alaa Aldin al-Chomari. The University of Kansas History Department is generously sponsoring this session, and we are pleased to offer Arabic-English interpretation to ensure accessibility and engagement across linguistic backgrounds. If you want to hear in Arabic, please click on interpretation. On your screen, the bottom of your screen, you will see either language or a sign of earth, and you can click there on language and you will choose Arabic and you will be able to listen to Arabic. When a speaker is speaking in Arabic and you would like to hear in English, you can click there on English and hear the translation into English. And again, thank you to our dear friend and student here at KU, Ahmad Subhi, who is working on the translation. Today's panel brings together a distinguished group of scholars whose work spans nearly a century of Syrian Druze history, from the pivotal 1925 revolt led by Sultan al-Atrash to the evolving political, legal, and social dynamics in Suwayda today. Their insights will help us better understand the complex interplay between national identity, local governance, and minority politics in Syria. Before we begin, we must take a moment to acknowledge the tragic massacres that occurred in Suwayda in July 2025 and the ongoing challenges that have followed. These events have profoundly impacted Druze communities across Syria, the Middle East, and the diaspora, and they underscore the urgency and relevance of today's discussion. We honor the victims and extend our deepest solidarity to all those affected. When we first envisioned this roundtable back in December 2024, it was in the wake of the fall of the Assad regime, and with hope that 2025 would mark a reflective moment, 100 years since the Great Syrian Revolt of 1925. We did not anticipate that the challenges would arrive so swiftly, so dramatically, and with such devastating consequences. The events in Jaramana in April, followed by the violence in Suwayda in July, have only reinforced the importance of convening spaces like this one to deepen our understanding of the Druze experience in Syria and to engage critically with the historical and contemporary forces that are shaping it. For this sake, we have gathered here today 5 experts: Dr. Michael Provence, Dr. Joshua Landis, Dr. Rami Abou Diab, Mr. Nawras Aziz, and Mr. Mael Abu Omar. We invite you to engage actively in the discussion, ask questions, and reflect on the broader implications of these presentations, not only for the Druze communities, but for the understanding minority-state relations in the Middle East more broadly. Let's begin with our first speaker, Dr. Michael Provence. Dr. Michael Provence teaches modern Middle East history at the University of California, San Diego, with a focus on the 20th century Arab East. He received the BA in history from UC Berkeley in 1994, a PhD from University of Chicago in 2001. He was a research fellow at international organizations and institutions in France and Germany. He is the author of 2 books and many articles. The books are The Great Syrian Revolt and The Rise of Arab Nationalism, published in 2005, and The Last Ottoman Generation and Making the Modern Middle East in 2017. Both are also available in Arabic and Turkish. Professor Provence, the floor is yours, and you have up to 10 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Zeedan, and thank you to the University of Kansas for this enlightening and important conference, and for the invitation. some 25 years ago, I visited Mansour, Sultan al-Atrash in Kraya, and I visited him later in Damascus too, but the first time I met him, he said, or actually, I guess the first time was in Damascus. He said, we don't like America, and we don't like the things that America does in our region, but sometimes we like good Americans. Are you a good American? He told me this in English because he had been educated as the oldest son of Sultan al-Atrash at AUB in Beirut and in the Sorbonne in Paris. So he was an enormously learned, sophisticated, and thoughtful and open-minded person who I admired very, very much. I'm going to focus on the things I learned in the archives in my brief remarks here, and published sources about 1925 and 1925 revolt, and things I learned during my visits. There's the distinguished scholars on the panel, and Dr. Zeedan are better qualified to inform us about the tragic and terrible events of the past months in Suwayda, and so I'll spend my time with historical topics. I want to argue and make the point, the rather, I think, counterintuitive point that the Jabal Druze was more integrated into Syria and into Damascus in 1925 than in 2025. Now, and the fact that this integration 100 years ago was greater than integration into the larger political community and the state and the economy today was a very rude surprise for the forces of the French Mandate in 1925, who believed that the Jabal was separate and isolated and could be governed separately and differently from the rest of Syria. Now, I would say that in 1925 and in the past, integration with the larger state and society was certainly good for Syria when the Druze were central to the Syrian political community, good for Damascus, and usually not always good for the Druze as well. And that this isolation of the past, several decades actually, but most acutely recently, has been a disaster for everybody. Now, the integration was manifested during the 1925 revolt by the kind of things that people wanted and the kinds of things they spoke for. So the goals of the revolt in 1925 were Syrian unity and independence of Bilad al-Sham generally. We talked about this a bit together yesterday. Not uniquely independence for the region or for Jabal Hawran, but for the entire country and all people. And in fact, Sultan al-Atrash and the Druze fighters who joined him in the early days were exemplars, heroes, and role models for the entire country from Aleppo. And in fact, they were celebrated in Cairo, in Jerusalem, in Amman, in Beirut, in Saida, all over the entire region, celebrated as heroes of Arab independence. And this heroic status remained for decades and decades, and it remains today, I would say. They also were very active and careful to restrain sectarian tensions during the course of the revolt. Sultan himself sent a number of letters. Of course, there were also many Christians. The French suppressed the activities of Christian rebels cooperating with the revolutionaries, because it was contrary to their narratives about French colonialism in the region. And so, in the famous words, Sultan al-Atrash said, "Religion is for God, and the nation is for all." And this was the structure of the slogan of the time, the most important slogan of the time. I pointed out earlier that they called it the Syrian Patriotic Revolution, not the Druze Revolt, not the Great Syrian Revolt, the Syrian Patriotic Revolution. This was what they called it at the time. Now, one of the things that accounted for the centrality of the revolt to Syrian political culture at the time was the lasting consequences of two things, two structures really: commercial integration between Damascus and Hauran over agricultural exports, grain especially, and merchants in Damascus who were engaged in the grain trade, who were some Christians, some Muslims, no Druze, who interacted. And so there was a correspondence that became the conduit for revolt in 1925. And the other thing that I would say is that the Hauran had been a refuge for rebels. It became a refuge for political refugees from Ottoman oppression and French oppression during the period of the Great War and after. And so Sultan and others met a long series of influential political thinkers, theorists, people like Abdurrahman Shahbandar, the great Syrian politician who was the leader and the founder of the People's Party, or the Hizb al-Sha'b, and Rustam Haidar, the lawyer and advisor for King Faisal, both in Syria and in Iraq, and a whole long list of distinguished nationalist and political intellectuals. And so in this way, the political community of Syria, in a way, was born. The imaginary notion, the conception, the aspiration for a unified Syria could be said to have been born in these Atrash, these Turshan Madafi, in the period during the Great War, after the Great War, when this long conduit stream of political intellectuals and refugees passed through, spent time eating Druze mansaf and drinking bitter coffee and talking with these Druze sheikhs who then became revolutionaries. Kamal Salibi wrote an article, which I'm going to wind up here, about Rustam Haidar. Sorry, 1 minute. Rustam Haidar, who went and was overwhelmed by Druze hospitality, as I have been overwhelmed by Druze hospitality. But of course, he also said, it was incredible because they fed us the biggest plate of food that I'd ever seen in my life, but there were no forks and no knives and no spoons, and we all had to eat with our hands. And he said, thank God for the existence of soap. So this was Rustam Haidar about a banquet. I'm going to conclude with something that a Syrian intellectual who I admire very much, and who is a close friend, Wael wrote not long ago about the situation and the long history of Hauran and its integration into Syria. He wrote, from Ibrahim Pasha to Shishakli to Bashar al-Assad, every leader who misread the mountain has paid dearly. Were I in Shara's position, I would not have chosen confrontation with the Druze. A better way, a better path, would have been to extend a hand to the Druzes, to the enduring legacy of the Druze as leaders of the Syrian political community, exemplars of pluralism and tolerance and coexistence and national spirit in Syria, and not a boot to their throats. So I think Wael Sawah hit it and said everything that needs to be said. So thank you very much.
Thank you to Professor Provence for these words, and especially for ending with this specific note. That was meaningful. Professor Provence will be leaving us shortly. Unfortunately, he needs to catch his flight, so he will not be with us for the discussion that will happen later. Our second speaker is Dr. Joshua Landis. He is Sandra McKee Chair and Co-Director of the Center for Middle Eastern Studies in the Boren College of International Studies at the University of Oklahoma. He is also Director of the Farzaneh Family Center of Iran and Persian Gulf Studies. Dr. Landis publishes frequently in policy journals such as Foreign Affairs, Middle Eastern Policy, and Foreign Policy. His book, Syria at Independence, Nationalism, Leadership, and Failure of Republicanism, will be published by the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies this coming year. Dr. Landis has written many scholarly articles and is a frequent analyst on TV, radio, and print. He has appeared many times in the Australian Broadcasting Corp. He is a non-resident fellow at the Quincy Institute in Washington, D.C. He has received 3 Fulbright grants to support his research in Syria and won numerous prizes for his teaching. He is past president of the Syrian Studies Association as well. He has lived over 15 years in the Middle East and 4 years in Syria, and he spent most of the summers in Syria before the uprising in 2011. Dr. Landis will present a paper on Quwatli's and Shishakli's policy towards as-Suwayda and a comparison with the Sharaa policy. Professor Landis, the floor is yours, and you have up to 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rami, and thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure to be part of this conference. What I want to do is very simple, which is to look at 2 periods of Druze history and try to compare them. The early independence with mostly Quwatli and then Shishakli, and how they tried to integrate the Jebel Druze and how the Jebel Druze resisted, and the same period today. I'll make comparisons because there's many to be made, and then at the end I'll try to see what lessons we can learn about what may happen with the Jebel Druze in the future. The comparisons. In both situations, the Druze had really complete autonomy before Damascus tried to integrate them. In May 1945, the French de Gaulle bombarded Damascus in an effort to reimpose the French mandate. The British told Syrian troops to go back to the barracks, and that same day, the day following, I guess, the Jebel Druze led an uprising against their French officers who were leading the Groupement Druze in the region, and they arrested them all and took power for themselves. So the Jebel Druze was independent for a year before Syria got its full independence in April 1946. And so too today, under Sharaa, where the Jebel Druze had really expelled all of the Syrian troops and was living on its own with its own leadership, its own military and police force for over a year before Sharaa tried to incorporate it under his control. So those are similarities. It had its own military. In both cases, Damascus tries to replace the officials, all the Druze officials, with their own officials, and to dissolve the military might of the Druze. Now, in both cases, the Druze asked for, in a sense, their own Ministry of Defense. They wanted to keep their own troops in the Jebel Druze. They wanted to keep their own police in the Jebel Druze, and they wanted to keep their own leadership. They didn't want the Turshan and the al-Atrash leadership to be dissolved, and in the same way that Hikmat, Hijri, and so forth, the Mashiach system is present in the Jebel Druze today. Now, how did Damascus try to undermine both of these regimes in the Jebel Druze? First, they sowed dissent and tried to split the Jebel. In 1946, Quwatli got a number of secondary sheikhs, and he armed them, sent them machine guns, gave them money to rise up against the Turshan, trying to cause a civil war that would ultimately undermine the solidarity of the Jebel. Then he demonized the Druze, calling them traitors. In that time, they were going to, Hassan al-Atrash, the paramount sheikh, constantly said that he would secede to Jordan, in the same way that the Jebel Druze today has looked to Israel for support against Damascus. So they demonized the Druze for their religion, saying they are insulting Muhammad and saying that they are not good Muslims. And then they also accused them of treason, of course, in both cases. And that was the technique to try to turn Syria against the Jebel. And in the end, how did the Druze overcome these challenges? That's the comparison that I hope to make at the end, to show and see what lessons we can draw. How did the Druze overcome this effort, particularly the Shishakli years, and what might happen in the future, which of course we don't really know. But let me start in the negotiations between a Syrian minister of the interior and Emir Hassan al-Atrash in 1946. The Druze demanded two things. They wanted a lot of economic help, and they wanted quasi-political independence. Emir Hassan insisted that the Damascus pay for better schools, better roads, running water system in the Jebel. These economic demands underlined how dependent the Jebel was on state services. The region had little modern infrastructure and was very poor. It needed Damascus a lot. To ensure the continuation of the Atrash leadership and the Mashayikha system on which it was founded, Emir Hassan demanded that a separate Druze Ministry of Defense be established, and that the minister be chosen from the Jebel. Of course, to President Quwatli and Prime Minister Mardam, this seemed beyond the pale. This is what the French had done, and they were going to end this kind of autonomy for the Jebel Druze. To make matters worse, Emir Hassan repeatedly threatened that if his demands were not met, that he would secede from Syria and attach himself from Jordan. Sultan Basha had actually threatened to move 4,000 members of the Druze to attack Damascus. That's after Quwatli insulted the Druze and called them a dangerous minority in a newspaper, and he had to retract that. He tried to buy Sultan Basha and give him a house in Damascus and 20,000 pounds and so forth, if he would come and sit at his right during Yom al-Jala, the Independence Day in 46. As Sultan Pasha refused, he said, no, we're going to have our own celebration. You should come and sit on my right in the Jebel Druze, in Suwayda. And of course, Quwatli said stuflu, and that was the end of that. Quwatli insisted that new elections, then in 47, there were elections in Syria. The Atrash won all 5 seats, and their supporters won all 5 seats in the Jebel Druze. And what did Quwatli do? He said these were falsely done. But even his director of elections said they were actually honest elections in the Jebel Druze, and the Atrash won because they were because they always won. And so he said, okay, they cannot sit in parliament. And so that's another comparison. In the same way that the Druze have been excluded from the most recent elections, if we can call them that, they were also excluded from elections, and their deputies were not allowed to sit in the Syrian parliament, so they didn't have any representation. So one can easily make a comparison between the divide and conquer strategies of Quwatli in 47 and Sharaa in 2025. Quwatli demonized Emir Hassan al-Atrash as a backwards feudal oppressor who was out of step with the times and the imperative of centralization. In the same way that Sharaa has accused Sheikh Hikmat al-Hijri of being stubborn, sectarian, disloyal to the nation, and all of the things we know only too well. the effort to lead a civil war actually led to a lot of deaths in the Jebel Druze at the time. The conflict between what were called the Shabiyun, or the populars, and the Atrash led to a number of full-pitched battles in 1947. In July, a popular militia overran the town of Salkhad, shooting 20 Atrash supporters and expelling all the Atrash administrators. In November, they killed an additional 20 in an attack on Qaraya, Sultan Pasha's home. But the Atrashes completely routed the populars by the end of 47, captured their 4 principal leaders, and they shut down the Jebel Druze, and they cut it off from the rest of Syria. They put roadblocks, they cut the telephone lines, complete autonomy. And Damascus sent its troops around the edges of the Jebel Druze in a situation that really mirrors what has happened today in many ways. But then the 48 war came, and all eyes turned away from the Jebel Druze, and it wasn't, and Quwatli, of course, because of his disastrous war effort, was overthrown in 49, and Shishakli comes to power at the third coup, and he tries to dominate the Jebel Druze. Of course, it's going to be very different under Shishakli, because by 1950, 51, Shishakli had built the army up from 6,000 troops in 1946 to 45,000 troops by 1951, and they could completely dominate the Jebel. He embargoed the Jebel. He spent no money in the Jebel. All money was going towards up near the Jazeera, where pumps, tractors, and so forth were turning it into big cotton fields, wheat growing, which really had a bad effect on the Hodan wheat and Jebel Druze, because the wheat prices fell, and the Jebel suffered tremendously. The Atrash, he began to name all the streets different names, nationalist names. It went from being Jebel Druze to Jebel Arab, and he imposed this sort of Arabization and national names, and he tried to replace all the officers. He fired Druze officers. Only one colonel was left by 1954, and he was put in Deir ez-Zor in sort of exile. But others were stripped, especially relatives of both Hassan and Sultan Basha were pushed out of the army. So there was great discrimination against Druze in the administration at all levels, and they lost their jobs, and they suffered. So the Druze began to cooperate with the Hizb Shab in Aleppo and the opposition, the Ba'ath Party as well. This led, with big demonstrations in the Jebel Druze, this led to a bombardment. And then it was, and Shishakli, I have to read to you the quote from, an important quote from Nasser's radio, Sawt al-Arab, because Shishakli was trying to demonize the Druze. And here is one of the typical radio announcements that came over Sawt al-Arab. The Druze are a sect. They are not Arab. They are not Arab in any way. The Druze hate the Arabs. The Druze have their own beliefs. They are servants of the British and the Jews in Israel. The Druze are traitors. They're enemies of Islam. They're friends of Israel. A very simple message, but a message that was pumped out in 1954, and it's the same message that's being pumped out today. Shishakli took Druze books and published them and claimed that the Druze are insulting Muhammad and they are, all this sort of thing. Of course, the Druze Authority says these books have been altered. It's not true. None of this is truth. This is all tashwish wa balbala from the regime. And but interestingly, the American military attaché in Syria claimed that the Usyan, that the coup and the rising against Shishakli began with the Druze officers that had been exiled in Deir ez-Zor, and that they had set the military coup and set the military uprising, one of them being a relative of Sultan Basha al-Atrash. And so the Druze were able, in a sense, to get revenge and to protect themselves because they still had officers in the military and because there were officers willing to cooperate with them in the military. And many of the politicians, especially from Homs and Aleppo, were in opposition to Shishakli and rose up against him. And Shishakli left on an American airplane, and Parliament came back into session. The Druze were reintegrated into Syria because Hassan al-Atrash and the Druze deputies were all returned to Parliament. They sat in Parliament, and Hassan al-Atrash, the leader, was given the Ministry of Agriculture. So he could actually bring money from Damascus to the Jebel Druze, and he could protect the leadership, he could protect the economy, and do good things for the Jebel, which the Jebel needed more than anything else because it was very dependent on Damascus. So that resolution came that way. Let me just sum up.
Dr. Landis, if you can please.
Yes, I'll just finish by saying, what's the situation today? The biggest differences are that then, at independence, Syria was a democracy, back and forth, but ultimately, because the Druze could get back into Parliament, they could have some representation, which is what, in a sense, the Druze have been asking for from Sharaa. They don't trust that he will give them any representation, and he's not. He's holding all the power. Secondly, Quwatli was never able to purge the army of its minorities. And that's what he wanted to do more than anything else. And in 46, he put his friend Azmi in charge at Ministry of Defense and told him to get rid of the entire army. And he was going to rebuild it with American help. And he couldn't get rid of it because the war in because of partition and then the war in 48, he had to keep it. And because the officers in the military said they would overthrow him if he tried to disband the military completely. So he had to fire Azmi as Minister of Defense and keep the army, which was full of minority people, particularly Alawites, as we know, who would rise up the ranks later on. Sharaa has been able to completely destroy the Syrian army of Assad in a way that Quwatli could not do. And he's rebuilt it with his own people, with Sunnis, up and down the entire officer corps. So there's no ability for Druze in the military to protect the Jebel. And there's no ability today for Druze to be elected to Parliament and to have real representation with any real power in Parliament to bring money from Damascus to the Jebel. And so the Druze find themselves at a dead end. Of course, another big difference is that Israel today has helped the Jebel Druze, whereas in 1946, Jordan refused to help the Jebel. But Israel has helped the Jebel today. But what Israel will really be willing to do in the long run, whether on the economic level, on any other level, is a big question mark. And the Druze today find themselves at a bit of a dead end. And I will leave you then with the final quote of Hassan al-Atrash in 54, who talked to the British ambassador and said, the Druze, as a religious minority, are doomed to constant persecution in Muslim lands, where no foreign power exists to protect them. Under the spur of Muslim hostility, the clans of the Jebel are now united, and the young men are demanding revenge by the force of arms. The Druze elders would like to emigrate to some other land where they will not be subject to religious persecution. On those sad words, I leave us because I think many Druze are feeling the same way today, and they don't know how to find their way out. Now, fortunately, the Druze in 54 did find a way out and reintegrated, and perhaps that will happen again in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Landis, for this very important comparison to the Quwatli and the Shishakli period, and how the Druze found themselves in such a dire situation back then, and how this resonates with today, and some problems that they are facing, and how they can think about their way out of it, maybe in similar ways that have happened in the past. Thank you so much for that. Our third speaker is Dr. Rami Abou Diab. He is a lecturer at the University of La Sagesse in Lebanon in the Department of Political Science and International Relations. Abou Diab had a PhD in geopolitics from the French Institute of Geopolitics and an MA from the University of Paris. Abou Diab is also a journalist at Arab News and the founder of FA Lebanon, a sports media company covering Lebanese athletics. Dr. Abou Diab will present a paper on the resurgence of the Druze particularism in as-Suwayda. And the presentation will be in English, if I'm not mistaken. Dr. Abou Diab, you will have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Today I will talk about the resurgence of Druze particularism in Suwayda. And sorry for my French accent. First of all, I would like to talk about my research background, how I ended writing and working on Suwayda. I was 11 years ago a student at La Sorbonne and focusing on French politics. And then I followed Dr. Tobias Long, who is currently the director of Austrian Peace Center. And we started writing about Jabal as-Sumaq, the Druze community in Idlib. And they have the specificity to be geographically isolated to the other Druze communities in the Mashriq. And they faced, since 11 years ago, persecution and discrimination from Jabhat al-Nusra and so on. Then I worked specifically on the role of al-Mashayikh, the Druze clerics, in the military with the Druze militias. And I was always comparing the role of the Lebanese Druze Mashayikh during the Lebanese Civil War, and especially the War of the Mountain. So the subject is here to do an analysis of the revival of the Druze particularism on the occasion of the century of the Great Syrian Revolt, and to ask if it's a revival or maybe a redefinition or maybe an evolution. What is the Druze particularism in Suwayda and in the Mashriq, al-Khususiyya Durziyya? For example, the previous Sheikh al-Aqil in Lebanon, Sheikh Naim Hassan, said it's easy. All we have to do is to open an history book. It's a bit cliche, but it's the Druze political personality, the quest for autonomy, the quest for independence against the French, against the Ottoman, and so on. And it's something shared by the Lebanese Druze and the Syrian Druze. The second point is the Druze social contract, حفظ الإخوان والحفاظ عن الأرض والعرض والدين, the defense of the land, the dignity, and the religion. That's what bring together the Druze solidarity beyond borders. The third point is the Druze tolerance, and I'm here in the Shuf, and like in the Shuf before, in Suwayda, the Druze contributed to the establishment of mosques and of churches. It's a well-known fact, and that's why the slogan of the Great Syrian Revolt was also religion for God, a nation for all. And we have a lot of similarities between Sultan al-Atrash and Emir Fakhreddin on this particular Druze tolerance. What happened to the Druze after the independence? Professor Landis explained it really well, the clash between autonomy versus integration. The military and political Druze particularism evaporated all over the years, but the cultural memory stayed, especially in the poetry, in the songs, and in the oral history. For example, I will talk about Shishakli. Shishakli was assassinated in 1964 by a Druze man, Nawaf Ghazali, and 20 years ago, and it was a particular year in the relation between Lebanon and Syria, he was dead, and in this funeral, the Druze, I don't think if you can, wait, I will check if the video will work, but in this funeral, there was a sectarian slogan, Shishakli, why did you mess with the Druze? And the speaker was asking the people not to repeat the slogan because in the Ba'athist regime, it's forbidden. So be careful if you have earphone. I will start the video. Wait. Nawaf Ghazali assassinated Shishakli for revenge. And also, if you see the scene here, we don't see any Druze flag. Meanwhile, nowadays in Suwayda and in all Druze areas except Idlib, we see a Druze flag. Druze flag is also a sign of the revival of Druze particularism and also the revival of military Druze particularism with the key role of the Mashayikh. And the revival of Druze particularism is not something new because it was aimed also to preserve the social fabric with the Sunni community. There was an agreement that the soldiers, the Druze soldiers in the Syrian Arab army has the option not to fight outside Suwayda. But in the meantime, there was an escalation, and there's still an escalation of sectarian attacks targeting the Druze from Idlib to Suwayda, from Hadar to Jaramana, and particularly in Idlib. There is a video of Sheikh Wahid al-Bal'ouz, the founder of the Mail of Dignity. He was assassinated 10 years ago, and he was talking about the situation of the Druze in Idlib. He was blaming the Syrian president at that time, Bashar al-Assad, for not protecting the Druze of Idlib. And he said that we don't want a new Alawite or Druze president who is sectarian, and we don't have any problem to have a Sunni president, as long as he's not like Shishakli, and as long as he doesn't care about some fatwa against the Druze. So there is, in geopolitically speaking, the creation of the enemy, and Shishakli is the paramount figure of the enemy. So it was not a surprise to see people celebrating the end of the fighting in the July attacks by singing the same slogan, but this time they changed the name, Shishakli to Julani. Julani, why did you mess with the Druze? What happened to you? I will like. So instead of celebrating all the year the Great Syrian Revolt and the Syrian unity, the Druze were celebrating, not really celebrating, but yes, you can say celebrating, but with yes, celebrating the fact that they achieved to protect their presence in Suwayda under particularism. And I published a video on LinkedIn 2 months ago. On the left, you can hear Sultan al-Atrash speaking about Syrian unity, and on the right, you can see a pro-government Syrian fighter in Suwayda destroying the portrait of Sultan al-Atrash. Because what happened in the July war was not only the destruction of buildings and villages, it was also mean to humiliating the Druze culturally speaking with the shaving of the mustache, and that was what Amnesty International said in the report. And also by destroying the portrait of Sultan al-Atrash, it's a message. We cannot hide it. The videos are playing without sound, but I'm trying always to say to what is happening. So the question is, what's next? But also to understand that what happened in July, and in July was also previsible and predictable on many levels, because what happened, culturally speaking, in Jaramana, Sahnaya, and then Suwayda already happened in Idlib 11 years ago with Julani, and now he's being called Ahmad al-Sharaa. So the major findings, I selected two. There is a change in dimension. Yesterday, Professor Provence talked about the fact that the Druze entity, the Druze state, was historically an external concept, project, a French project. Nowadays, it's a locally rooted idea, the Druze entity, or the Druze state, the Druze province, whatever we can name it, in order to protect the Druze particularism. And Sheikh Hikmat al-Hajari, the strong man in Suwayda, said that in order to protect our cultural society, we need a distinctive Druze entity. There is also a change in strategy with the so-called alliance of minorities, or the alliance with Israel, and here is a divergence point with the Lebanese Druze leader, Walid Jumblat. In conclusion, I want to say something that usually Suwayda is called Jabal al-Druze, the mountain of the Druze, and it's a reflection of the Druze particularism and history in this area. Or Jabal al-Arab, it's a reflection also to their contribution to the Arab nationalism. And also Jabal al-Rayyan, it's an esoteric term and also widely used in poetry and in Jufiye, in military songs. Recently, last week, Sheikh Hikmat al-Hajr, the strong man in Suwayda, used the term of Jabal al-Bashan to name Suwayda. He made a statement, he published a statement calling for the end of the humanitarian crisis and the blockade on Suwayda, but the media highlighted this naming, this particular naming. Jabal al-Bashan is a biblical name of not only Suwayda, but let's call it the Hawran from Jordan to the Golan. And it created some controversies, including with Lebanese Druze who are affiliated with Walid Jumblat. And this naming also reflects that there is not only a revival of the Druze particularism, but also an evolution, maybe a shift, maybe a redefinition. And thank you for listening to me. I'm sorry for the sounds of the videos. Thank you.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Rami Abou Diab, for this perspective, more of a political scientist of the current developments in al-Suwayda. Our fourth paper for this roundtable is going to be presented by two co-authors. I will be presenting them together. Mael Baummar is a PhD student at the University of Pécs, focusing primarily on public and administrative law, with specialized research bridging this legal expertise with the political and historical context of the Druze, which is evidenced by his work on administrative autonomy of the Druze French mandate in Syria, and the current papers focus on governance. His co-author is Nawras Aziz, who is a Syrian journalist, TV producer, and documentary filmmaker specializing in the Druze affairs and history. It provides contemporary, field-based insight into the social and political dynamics of the Druze in Suwayda and the present protests, often serving as an expert commentator on the region. Mr. Nawras Aziz and Mr. Mael Baummar will present a paper on the role of customary law in context of legal vacuum, a case study of Suwayda Governorate in Syria between 1925 to 2025. The presentation will be in Arabic, and I would like to remind our audience here that if you would like to hear a translation from Arabic to English, please use the interpretation feature on the bottom of your Zoom screen and click on interpretation to use the language that you'd like to hear. Mr. Mael and Mr. Nawras Aziz, please, the floor is yours. You have up to 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Rami. Thank you for everyone here. I'm glad to be here with you. I will speak in Arabic. في الحقيقة في هذه الجلسة سنتحدث عن ورقة بحثية بعنوان الدور العرف في سياق الفراغ القانوني I'm sorry, I should just turn off the translate. It's so high. I don't know why it's work. Just okay, it's no problem. I will continue. اوكي، الحقيقة في هذه الجلسة سنتحدث عن ورقة بحثية بعنوان دور العرف في سياق الفراغ القانوني، دراسة حالة محافظة السويداء سوريا بين العامي 1925 و 2025. هذه الورقة حاولنا الإجابة على سؤال رئيسي، هو الحقيقة في ظل انهيار مؤسسات الدولة أو غيابها، كيف يمكن تفسير عودة القانون العرفي في السويداء؟ هل تمثل هذه العودة استجابة براغماتية لفراغ الحكم، أم أنها تعبير عن خصوصية ثقافية تتحدى أولوية القانون؟ سوف أبدأ بالجزء الأول الذي يتناول الخلفيات التاريخية والقيادات التقليدية للطائفة الدرزية، ثم يكمل زميلي العرض ليتناول الإطار الاجتماعي والقانوني المرتبط بهذا الموضوع. الحقيقة سوف أبدأ بالجزء الأول الذي يتناول الخلفيات التاريخية. من خلال تتبع المسار التاريخي والاجتماعي للطائفة الدرزية في السويداء، سعت الدراسة إلى إبراز كيف أنتجت البنى التقليدية والعرفية مرجعيات حاكمة في مراحل تراجع أو ضعف الدولة، بدءا من العهد العثماني مرورا بفترة الانتداب الفرنسي وبعدها الاستقلال، وصولا إلى مرحلة حكم البعث وما أعقبها من تفكك الدولة السورية بعد العام 2011. الحقيقة مر المجتمع الدرزي في السويداء خلال القرن الماضي بتحولات جوهرية يمكن تتبعها عبر عدة مراحل تاريخية شكلت وعي جماعة الدرزية وزادت دور الأعراف والعادات. فمنذ العهد العثماني شكلت العائلات الكبرى في جبل العرب إطارا رئيسيا للسلطة الاجتماعية والسياسية. هذه العائلات لم تكن مجرد وحدات تربطها قرابة، بل كانت قادرة على حشد الأتباع، وقادرة أيضا على إدارة النزاع وحماية المصالح المحلية. ومع ضعف السلطة العثمانية في الأطراف، كان القانون العرفي هو المرجعية الفعلية في تنظيم الحياة اليومية، وكانت سلطة العائلات البارزة كفيلة بتنظيم العلاقات، فض النزاعات، وتوزيع الموارد، مستندة إلى منظومة عرفية تستمد مشروعيتها من إجماع الجماعة وليس فقط من القانون أو ليس من القانون المكتوب.
Dear Nawras, I have to stop you. You are speaking too fast. It is making it impossible for our language interpreter to follow up with you and be able to make this event accessible. So I'll be asking you again and all of the other speakers to speak as slowly as possible to allow for our language interpreter to translate to English. Thank you so much.
Okay, I'm sorry, I will do it. Okay. مع دخول الانتداب الفرنسي في عشرينيات القرن الماضي، حاولت الإدارة الاستعمارية السيطرة على هذه البنى العائلية من خلال تعزيز الانقسامات، حيث اعتمدت على بعض الزعامات العائلية في مواجهة زعامات أخرى، مستفيدة من التنافس الداخلي بين عائلات السويداء. التحول الذي أحدثه الفرنسيون كان تحولا شكلي. الإدارة الذاتية أو ما يعرف بالدولة الدرزية التي أسسوها وعينوا الأمير سليم حاكما عليها، وهو من عائلة الأطرش صاحبة الزعامة التقليدية، كانت ضمن ترتيبات تؤمن للفرنسيين السيطرة على المنطقة. وهذه التجربة لم تضمن ولاء أو احترام مختلف شرائح المجتمع الدرزي. إذ اعتبرت مؤسسات الدولة الجديدة امتدادا للسلطة الاستعمارية. ما عمق الشعور بأن العادات المحلية أكثر شرعية. وهنا تبرز حادثة أدهم خنجر في صيف عام 1922 كدليل واضح. إن حادثة أدهم خنجر في العام 1922 جاءت كدليل واضح حين لجأ أدهم خنجر وهو ثائر لبناني إلى جبل الدروز واستجار بالزعيم سلطان الأطرش، فاعتقلته السلطات بحجة تطبيق القانون، لكن الأطرش رفض ذلك وأصر على العرف القاضي بحماية الضيف. وهو عرف متجذر جعل العادات تتفوق على القانون الرسمي في مخيال الجماعة. بعد الاستقلال بقيت القيادات التقليدية حاضرة على الرغم من وجود الحركة الشعبية التي تحدث عنها زميلنا قبل قليل الدكتور جوشوا، التي كان وراءها عدد من المثقفين الدروز، والتي واجهت بشكل مباشر عائلة الأطرش والمتحالفين معها في العام 1947، والتي الحقيقة حدت من هيمنة الزعامات التقليدية. مع وصول حزب البعث إلى السلطة جرت محاولات لإضعاف سلطة العائلات التقليدية وشيوخ العقل، عبر تهميشهم تدريجيا، حيث شهدت هذه الفترة فرض الأجهزة الأمنية سيطرتها على مفاصل الدولة، حيث كرست حالة الطوارئ بين العامين 1963 حتى العام 2011. فشهدت المرجعيات الاجتماعية حالة من الضعف والكمون، منذ العام 2011 وحتى سقوط نظام البعث في نهاية عام 2024. تراجعت السلطة تدريجيا، وشهد المجتمع الدرزي وجود فراغ قانوني متجدد والحقيقة عادت آليات العدالة غير الرسمية إلى الظهور، مثل الصلح والوساطة وإلى آخره. واستعاد شيخ العقل مركزيته كقائد اجتماعي. الآن أترك المجال لزميلي معا لاستكمال النقاش من الزاوية القانونية. شكرا لك.
شكرا نورس. في هذا الجزء من المناقشة سأتناول البعد الاجتماعي والقانوني في مجتمع السويداء. يمكن وصف واقع السويداء خلال 100 عام الأخيرة، خاصة في الفترات التي اتسمت بغياب مؤسسات الدولة أو تراجع فعاليتها، بأنها حالة من الفراغ القانوني. في ظل الفراغ عادة ما يستعيد العرف دوره كمرجعية لتنظيم العلاقات وحل النزاعات، ويثير هذا الوضع سؤالا حول كفاية العرف بصفته بديلا في غياب القانون أو مدى تجذره إلى الدرجة التي قد تمنع عودة القانون. من منظور علم النفس الاجتماعي وصلت الدراسة إلى أن مجتمع السويداء يمكن أن يندرج ضمن مجتمعات ما قبل الدولة، إلا أنه يختلف عن المجتمعات القبلية التقليدية. كما أن المجتمع الدرزي في السويداء لا ينظر للعرف كونه مرجعية عميقة، ذلك أنه رغم مساهمة العرف في توفير الأمن والعدل والهوية في غياب الدولة، إلا أنه في السويداء لا يمكن النظر إليه إلا كبديل مؤقت للقانون. ويبدو هذا يعود لأن المجتمع الدرزي في السويداء لا يحكمه تشريع أو فقه ديني مدون، ولا تسود فيه الزعامات القبلية المحضة أو البحتة، بل ثمة تداخل بين الهوية الدينية والعائلية والقبلية، بما يشكل نسيجا اجتماعيا ذات خصوصية. ويمكن القول أنه في الفترة الممتدة من 1925 حتى اليوم عملت آليات حل النزاعات في السويداء ضمن مستويين متوازيين ومتداخلين. المستوى الرسمي وهو المحاكم والمؤسسات الأمنية الذي كان يتم اللجوء إليه في القضايا المدنية أو القضايا التي تتطلب قوة إنفاذ. والمستوى غير الرسمي أي الأطر العرفية ومشيخة العقل، والذي كان المرجع الأساسي لحل النزاعات التي تهدد الأمن المجتمعي. جدير بالذكر عودة دور المثقفين وقادة الحراك المدني كمتعاون مع دور مشيخة العقل، حيث لعب الطرفان دورا متكاملا. بالإضافة إلى ذلك تظهر المقارنة بين مجتمع السويداء وبعض القبائل في شمال مصر والبدو في الأردن أوجه اختلاف مهمة في الاعتماد على الأطر العرفية، حيث يبرز في السويداء ميل المجتمع نحو المصالحات أكثر منه نحو العرف بمعناه القانوني. باختصار، إن مجتمع السويداء ليس مجتمعا دينيا أو قبليا بالمعنى الاصطلاحي، إنه مجتمع يمر بمرحلة انتقالية ويسعى إلى دولة تسود فيها القانون، بدلاً من الاعتماد فقط على القوانين الدينية أو القبلية التقليدية أو القديمة. فالتحدي ليس في اندماج أعراف المجتمع الدرزي في دولة قانون حديثة، ولكن التحدي الحقيقي هو في بناء دولة تضمن العدالة والمساواة والإنصاف وتتعامل بحيادية دينية تجاه جميع المواطنين. وبالتالي لا يوجد تحدي مستقبلي في إدماج هذه الأعراف مثل ما هو موجود في المجتمعات المشابهة كالأردن، بل أن التحدي جوهري يكمن في وجود دولة القانون واحترام مبادئ المواطنة، ويكون ذلك بديلا حقيقيا للفراغ القانوني. دراستنا جمعت بين التحليل التاريخي والقانوني والمراجع الاجتماعية. بدأنا بتعريفات مفاهيمية، فككنا المصطلحات المتعلقة بالعرف مثل الطائفية، مفهوم المجتمع القبلي، فضلا عن العرف نفسه، حيث ميزنا بين الأعراف التي يقرها القانون في النزاعات المدنية والأعراف التي تتحدى النصوص الجزائية. تناولنا الخلفية التاريخية والنفسية والقبلية لمجتمع السويداء، وبعد ذلك قمنا بتحليل فعالية القانون العرفي في تحقيق العدالة والاستقرار. وأخيرا قدمت الدراسة نتائج على سؤالنا الرئيسي. كانت التحديات الرئيسية هي عدم وجود دراسات متخصصة في هذا المجال، لذلك اعتمدنا على دراسات مقارنة من مجتمعات أخرى وأبحاث في علم النفس الاجتماعي والنفسي لفهم العقلية الجماعية لسكان السويداء والجذور العميقة لأعرافهم. ساعدنا هذا في اختبار مدى إمكانية نجاح مثل هذه النظم العرفية في دولة حديثة يحكمها القانون. هذا كل شيء، وشكرا للاستماع.
Thank you so much, Mael. Thank you so much, Nawras. Again, thank you so much for Nawras and Mael. And we move to the discussion now. I will be asking the first two questions to Professor Landis and then hand the remainder of the discussion to my colleague, Dr. Aldin. So the questions for Professor Landis, I will actually start with a question that came from the audience from Shadi Halabi. And his question was the following. Sultan called for unity, dignity, and moral responsibility towards freedom, and he also rejected personal wealth. How do you see these values today? This is the first question. And the other question is about Quwatli and Shishakli that you presented earlier. How much did local leadership and civil society in as-Suwayda influence or oppose the policies of these three figures with al-Sharaa, and how did their reactions shape the results of the state actions? Professor Landis, you are muted. We haven't heard you.
Let me, thank you. Let me answer the first one, which is a moral question of whether the Druze are at the same moral level as Sultan Bashar al-Atrash. I don't know quite how to answer that, but obviously, the Druze have insisted that they want to be part of Syria, and they wanted equality and representation. And I think this is what Sultan Basha wanted as well. Now, of course, in 1946, the Druze wanted their own leadership. And when Quwatli told the Turshan that they should step down, Hassan al-Atrash went into a tirade, and he said, no, we rule, that the Atrash are the only people who can rule the Jebel Druze. We rule by the right of conquest, he said, and tradition. And we are the rulers. Now, the Druze did elect them time after time. And even the Christian deputy was always somebody sort of handpicked by the Turshan. So their authority within the Jebel Druze persisted. Now, of course, we just heard about how the Asads destroyed that authority in a sense, and that there is no, one of the big differences between 46 and today is that there is no paramount sheikh. There's no political leader. There are the religious leaders who've sort of taken that place, but there really isn't a substitute political leadership that has that kind of authority in the Jebel Druze today. And that's an important difference. Clearly, the authority that Sultan Pasha and his political adeptness in how not to get the Jebel into trouble and how to keep the door open to nationalist politics was very important. And I know that, clearly a criticism of Hikmat al-Hijri has been that he hasn't done that. And he has, he's in some ways, he's closed the door to dialogue with Damascus. But of course, the situation is very different today. And I think that door could open again quickly if there were, if there was a partner on the other side who was taken seriously. The second question, I didn't quite understand the second question. If you could repeat that for me, Rami.
Yes, indeed. So the question is about the local leadership and a little bit maybe about civil society, if you have knowledge about that in Suwayda, and how their policies and their actions and reactions correspond with the policies that are coming from the state. This question is more about the period of maybe Shishakli, if there's anything that you could contribute to that.
Well, I mean, the more important, Shishakli held elections for his own party in 1951. Only 5% of the Druze voted in that election. They understood that the whole thing was fake, and they weren't going to participate in it. And you have a situation today which is similar to that, where the Druze are disaffected, and especially after this massacre, they don't trust the regime. They're convinced that this regime is a Sunni supremacist regime that is going to not take them seriously, that as soon as they put their guns down, there's going to be more massacres. And of course, civil society is very troubling because it's so uncivil. You look at the way students were chased out of their universities in Homs and Hama and Damascus, right across the cities, and the way students and student groups began calling for the destruction of the Druze, and the way the Bedouin appeared in thousands and thousands from Deir ez-Zor and from all over. This is civil society, and it's not civil. And that's, you know, that scared everybody tremendously. And I know it's the same with it's the same in the Alawite region, where I've interviewed many people about the massacres, and there's just tremendous fear, and that fear. How does the regime, you know, how can society be put back onto a firm footing? It's going to take a long time, obviously, because there's such deep distrust, and I don't know the answer. And that's I turn to the rest of you, who probably have a much better ability to answer that than I do. Rami, you're on mute now.
I figured out that something was off, so I was asking if anybody is hearing me. Thank you, Joshua. I'd like to invite my co-chair for this session, Dr. Alaa al-Chomari, to join the conversation. Dr. Alaa al-Chomari is an associate professor and research manager at the Research Center for Islamic Numismatics at the University of Tübingen. He earned his PhD in Islamic history and archaeology from Panthéon-Sorbonne University in Paris in 2012. Dr. al-Chomari will engage with other speakers in Arabic.
شكرا جزيلا صديقي الدكتور رامي العزيز على جهودك وعلى هذا الجمع الطيب. اختصارا للوقت ومن أجل الاحتفاظ بالوقت للجلسة اللاحقة، أود أن أكون كريم أكثر مع السادة المتحدثين، ويوجد بالطبع الكثير من الأسئلة والحوار نستطيع أن نتابع به، ولكن سأتوجه بشكل مباشر للحفاظ على الوقت للدكتور رامي أبو دياب. لو سمحت، تناولت في مداخلتك عودة النزعة الخصوصية لدى الطائفة الدرزية في سوريا بمناسبة الذكرى المئوية للثورة السورية الكبرى عام 1925 من خلال تحليل جيوسياسي للتحولات الاستراتيجية. تحول الخصوصية الدرزية، كيف تفسر الطبقة السياسية والروحية الدرزية اللبنانية هذا التحول؟ هذا الشق الأول من السؤال. الاستفسار الآخر لو سمحت لي، هل هذا التحول دائم أم مرتبط بطبيعة النظام في سوريا؟
شكرا دكتورنا العزيز, and I will reply to you in English.
طبعا.
I used to meet a sheikh in Lebanon, a spiritual leader, and every time I used to ask him his opinion on Sheikh al-Hijari, he would reply to me in a polite way. Not really replying to me, but he used a proverb, Arab proverb, saying, أهل مكة أدرى بشعبها. The people of Mecca know best their interests. I don't know if it's the correct translation, but it means that the Druze in Lebanon will respect any decision taken by the Druze in Syria in order to protect themselves, their identity, their particularism, and their lands. And I will give you a concrete example of this proverb, application of this proverb. Kamal Jumbla, the late Kamal Jumbla, the great advocate of the Palestinian cause, never ever blamed the Israeli Druze, and especially Sheikh Amin Tarif, who made the alliance with the Israeli state. And even in his book for Lebanon, he praised Sheikh Amin Tarif, saying that he played a key role in preserving the existence of the Druze in Israel, Palestine, and to remain them in their lands. Nowadays, there is inside the Lebanese political and religious sacred union towards Suwayda for humanitarian matters. But for political matters, there is a clear division, and it's not something new in the Druze history. During the Great Syrian Revolt, for example, the Emir Adel Islan played a key role with Sultan al-Atrash, while Jumblat family stay aligned with France for many reasons. If I come back to the use in the last statement of Sheikh al-Hajari of Jabal al-Bashan, the Lebanese Druze Council, under the direction of Sheikh al-Aql, Sheikh Sami Ablouna, is very close to Walid Jumblat, published a statement via the magazine Al-Doha on Facebook, openly criticizing the change of naming and saying that the use of Jabal al-Bashan is against the Druze history, is an attempt to raise the heritage of Sultan al-Atrash, and so on. And it's linked to the fact that Walid Jumblat is against any alliance with Israel, and is also clearly against Sheikh al-Hajari actual strategies. But it's important to note that whenever someone has to analyze what's happening inside the Lebanese Druze community, especially since 2008, there is a growing role of the mashayikh, and especially the spiritual leaders, and especially one called Sheikh Amin al-Sayigh. But what's new is not the political division, is the fact that Walid Jumblat is playing a diplomatic role with Turkey, with Russia, with the US, with Mr. Tom Barak, in order to influence Suwayda, to push them to a dialogue with Ahmad al-Sharaa. It's complicated in politics. We can't say that it will not happen, but in the Druze religious law, a divorce is definitive usually. But to reply to the second question, it's complicated. But on the regional scale, Israel is achieving its military goals, especially concerning south of Syria, with the demilitarization of south of Syria. Let's see if the end of the Gaza war will push some Arab countries, especially Jordan, to play a real mediator role, because Syria is becoming a battlefield between Turkey and Israel, a kind of proxy war. But we have not to reduce what is happening in Suwayda as a proxy war between Israel and Turkey, because at the end, it's a new episode of a very old chapter that dates back way before the establishment of Israel. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Rami. سأذهب للأستاذ نورس عزيز. لو سمحت لي تناولت معي بهذه المشاركة عودة القانون العرفي، العرف وهياكل القيادة التقليدية في محافظة السويداء. سؤالي من الجانب التاريخي لك لو سمحت، كيف تعامل الفرنسيون مع قضية العرف داخل المجتمع الدرزي؟ والشق الآخر، ما هو دور السلطة الروحية العرفي أو القانوني أثناء الانتداب الفرنسي؟
نعم، تحياتي دكتور علاء. الحقيقة أول ما دخل الفرنسيون، أو أول ما تم إعلان تشكيل دولة جبل الدروز عام 1921، يعني واجه الفرنسيون فعلا معضلة، لأن هنالك بعض بقايا من القانون العثماني موجود، إضافة لوجود العرف الذي يحكم في محافظة السويداء. لذلك في التقرير الفصل الأخير عام 1921، يعني بخاصة بما يتعلق بالموضوع القضائي، قالوا بأن العرف سيستمر لسنوات طويلة. وأنا يعني التخصص الموجود فيه حاليا أو الدراسة التي قمت بها هي بين العام 1920 1927. فكانت في البدايات يعتقد بأن العرف سيسير يعني عدة سنوات سيحكم في السويداء، بالإضافة إلى إجراءات حوكمي ستقوم بها فرنسا، وهي بالفعل أدخلت أول محكمة مدنية ضمن ميزانية عام 1921. شكلت نوعين من المحاكم، محكمة هي ضمن المحاكم المدنية اسمها محكمة الحقوق، ومحكمة أخرى محكمة دينية اختصت بها طبعا المشايخ أو السلطة الدينية، السلطة الروحية. بالإضافة كان هنالك بعض الحالات التي أنشئ من أجلها محاكم خاصة. يعني هنالك حادثة جرت في المقرن الشمالي، حتى أعطي مثال، في منطقة وادي اللواء، وكان هنالك صراع بين عائلتين درزيتين. لم يكن هنالك اختصاص لأي محكمة، ولم يستطع العرف حل القضية. تم تشكيل محكمة خاصة برئاسة الأمير سليم، ضمت وجهاء، ضمت مشايخ دين، وأيضا ضمت يعني عدة أفراد من عامة الشعب. طبعا الحوكمة استمرت، تطورت، كان هنالك مشكلة عانى منها الفرنسيون في البدايات. لا يوجد يعني قاضي محلي يتقن عمله أو مختص في هذا المجال. كانت هنا أيضا يعني عدة أشكالات، وهذا أتحدث فيها في الفترة الأولى. أما بالنسبة يعني دور السلطة الروحية العرفي، بالفعل لعب الدور الوسيط أحيانا كثير في حل المشاكل بين الدروز، عقد الراي إلى ما هنالك. هذه المواضيع التي طبعا يتم تداولها في السويداء، أو الأحداث التي تتم في السويداء. الحقيقة يعني أضفت الشرعية أيضا على بعض القيادات على حساب قيادات أخرى تم استقطابها باتجاه معين تحت اسم العرف. يعني كانت إلى حد ما بالفعل أشرفت على تطبيق العرف المعروف في السويداء. أستطيع اختصارها في هذا الإطار.
شكرا جزيلا عزيزي الأستاذ نورس. الأستاذ مائل، لو سمحت لي أستاذ مائل أبو عمار، في حال تشكلت دولة القانون، هل يمكن إدماج الأعراف الدرزية في النظام القانوني الوطني؟
شكرا
هذا جزء أول.
دكتور. بالحقيقة يعني الدراسة أظهرت أنه العرف في مجتمع السويداء لا يأخذ المعنى المعروف للعرف بمجتمعات مشابهة. على سبيل المثال القبائل الأردنية حتى عام 1976 ظلت متمسكة بالعرف القبلي وامتنعت عن تطبيق القانون، وخضعت الدولة لهذه الأعراف. على سبيل المثال الثأر أو ما يسمى الجلوي، أو الفرض على قبيلة أو عائلة الجاني أن ترحل من المكان، وهذا عقوبة جماعية تتعارض مع العقوبات الشخصية اللي بالقوانين المدنية أو الجزائية. بينما مجتمع السويداء لا تنطبق عليه هذه القواعد، ودائما صدرت من السويداء ومن المجتمع الأهلي بالسويداء بيانات تتبرأ من الفاعل وتقول الفاعل بما فعل. لذلك لا يوجد أي معارضة ولا يمكن تصور أن العرف سيكون عائق أمام تطبيق دولة القانون في حال تشكلت. لكن التحدي كما قلنا هو في تشكيل دولة القانون نفسها. يعني مجتمع السويداء ليس عنده أساس تشريعي بديل، هو لديه طموح في دولة القانون. فإذا تشكلت هذه الدولة ضمن المعايير التي ترضي الوعي المدني الموجود عند الدروز في السويداء، المحايد دينيا، باعتبار أنهم هم يعني لا يريدون أن يطبق عليهم ما لا يؤمنون به، أو لا يطبق عليهم قوانين لا تمت لمعتقداتهم، فتبقى دولة القانون الحيادية هي الضامن يعني للقبول الاجتماعي والحصول على ثقة المجتمع بالسويداء. شكرا.
ممكن أنه نعتبر اعتبار مشيخة العقل مؤسسة دينية أم عرفية، علاقة بين المثقفين ومشيخة العقل؟
الحقيقة أنه
طبيعة
مشيخة
العلاقة قائمة.
العقل تمام. يعني مشيخة العقل بالسويداء كمان إذا عرفناها من وجهة نظر الآخرين ينظر إلها كأنها سلطة دينية، ولكن هذا الحقيقة سوء فهم، لأن سلطة هجينة ما بين السلطة الاجتماعية والعرفية والمتداخلة مع الهوية العائلية والقبلية. فالخصوصية اللي عند مشيخة العقل بتخرجها من التعريفات النمطية للسلطة الدينية أو العرفية. علاقتها مع المجتمع المدني بطبيعة الحال هي يعني اللي بيخليها تختلف عن المجتمعات القبلية المشابهة، بأنه المجتمع المدني أو المجتمع الأهلي بشكل عام هو اللي بيوجه مشيخة العقل وليس العكس. لهيك دائما كان بفترة النزاعات الأخيرة دور المثقفين متكامل مع دور مشيخة العقل. في مثال حديث ومثال يعني حالي يبين أو يثبت صحة من النظرية أو الاستنتاجات التي وصلت لها دراستنا، هي تشكيل اللجنة القانونية العليا بالسويداء، باعتبارها بحكم الأمر الواقع سلطة الإدارة أو الحكومة المصغرة، رغم أنه اللي شكلها أو اللي عينها سلطة يطلق عليها بين قوسين دينية، ولكن كان تشكيلها بالكامل من أشخاص قانونيين، القضاة والمحامين. ما كان في أي تمثيل قبلي أو ديني أو عرفي فهذا بيعكس بالحقيقة رغبة المجتمع وتقبل الناس لهذا التشكيل، هو دليل على وعي مدني. ولكن المشكلة يعني كانت في الآليات الأهلية، والمجتمع يحتاج إلى آليات للانتقال لدولة قانون عصرية أو حديثة، فالعرف لا يعتبر كافي لهذا الانتقال.
شكرا
أتمنى
جزيلا
أن يكون
أستاذ
الجواب
ماel.
كافي.
قبل أن ننتقل إلى صديقي الدكتور رامي، أود باختصار شديد أو بجملة يعني معرفة سؤال للمشاركين جميعا، للدكتور لاندس أيضا. ما هو أكبر سوء فهم شائع عن دروز السويداء أو الدروز عموما تتمنون تصحيحه؟ سأبدأ من دكتور لاندس.
You've asked me, if I've understood you correctly, what is the greatest mistake that the Druze are making that needs to be corrected? Thank you.
Professor Landis, the question is misconceptions of the Druze, not mistakes.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
The greatest
Very
misconceptions
important.
of the Druze.
I was on the spot there. Misconceptions of the Druze. Well, I think the Israel connection is clearly the most damaging to the Druze outside of Syria, because there is tremendous sympathy for the Palestinians and growing dislike of Israel. And so turning to Israel in this situation puts the Druze in a very difficult position. I understand perfectly why they've done it, and I know the Alawite community is doing the same thing, and they're speaking to AIPAC and other things because they want representation in Washington, and they believe that the only way that they're going to get heard by politicians in Washington is if they go through the Jewish community and get support amongst Americans, and that's true. And it's true for the Druze as well. And the Druze would have been slaughtered had they not had Israeli support. So, but that's a dilemma, and it puts the Druze in a very difficult position because, it puts the Druze in a difficult.
دكتور رامي.
شكرا Dr. Alaa. Thank you so much for this lovely discussion. And I would like to continue, although the time for our panel has ended. I think that this is a very important discussion that we are having here. And we still have a few important questions that needs to be asked. So with the permission of all of our panelists, we would like to extend for about 10 more minutes or so. So we're going to do it this way. I'm going to invite Dr. Birgit Scheibler and then Mr. Said Abouzaki. Please be as short as possible. Make your comment, make your question. Tell us the question is addressed to whom. We will collect these two addresses and then we will allow the panelists to answer their questions. So Dr. Scheibler, please.
Hi, thank you, Rami, for giving me a bit of time here. I would like to make a comment, and especially to my good colleagues, Michael Provence and Joshua Landis. So we are the three Westerners who have done a lot of research on the Jebel Druze. And I am probably the senior person here. So, I've met them all. I've met Saeed al-Atrash and Mansour al-Atrash, and I've been there for a long time, and I have really good connections still. And I have an alternative reading that has a lot of historical depth. I did this book a long time ago about Intifadat Jebel Druze Hawran. So I looked at the Intifadat, at the Thawras that were happening there. And what I found over a long period of time is that there is sort of, there is this what has been called here autonomy and particularism. I would like to reframe that and say there is a tendency to look inwards in this very, very dynamic society of the Jebel Druze, and there is a tendency to look outward, right? In America, we know that it's isolationism versus internationalism. At times, people look inward, the Syrian Druze especially, they did this in Al-Amia, for example, which was a peasant war against the Turshan. They looked outwards under the leadership of Sultan Pasha al-Atrash, who had, who knew Ibrahim Hananu and who knew and had a partnership with Dr. Shabander. So he looked outward and he wanted to have the Druze in a bigger entity. How big this entity is, I'm not sure that was so much the question, but he wanted them to be part of Syria. And then again, we had al-Shabiya, which was again an interior thing where sort of young people rose up against the Turshan again and sort of, wanted to democratize the Jebel. So this is, and then of course there was an integration into the Syrian state. There was of course constant negotiation. And I know, how careful, for example, Mansour al-Atrash were in his talks and in the speeches that he gave, and how he discussed them afterwards. It was a constant negotiation with the state, and the Druze were represented, and they were, sort of, they were well represented for a long time. But then, of course, also there is other factors in the region, and that is, it's a rain-fed region. We've had 30 years of really bad droughts, and so the relations within the Jebel and with their immediate neighbors, the Bedouin and the Hawarna, deteriorated. And then, of course, at some point we had the last Thawra in 2011, and then the civil war, or the war, whatever you want to call it, and the situation now. And it's true that the Druze in Syria sort of had to hold their own because really nobody helped them. And they had to rely on their own resources with droughts and very, rebellious neighbors. We all know that some of the Bedouin sort of allied with Daesh, or even joined Daesh in some cases, and it was a really rough time for the Druze, definitely. But of course, they held their own, like they always hold their own. And so now we have a situation that I read differently. I see that what we now have all over Syria is, this is, and we know that from Lebanon, this is a post-civil war society. So there is a deep distrust among each other and and of course to the new regime. And what I saw from the new regime, and it all boils down, if you give, this Ahmed al-Sharaa now a chance or not, is that there was some effort to sort of negotiate with the Jebel. He was the victor, right? He rode into Damascus. I mean, this was, remember how we all were enthusiastic that, sort of Bashar al-Assad was gone, and that al-Thawra sort of had at least this result. He was the absolute victor, rode into Damascus, and then traveled down to Suwayda, to the Jebel Druze, to sort of negotiate with the factions there. That was quite a step, in my view. And of course, there, I see in there the will to sort of, unify the country. But of course, I see also a lot of problems, and I do think that it is, the Druze in Syria are Syrians. They, in my view, they are totally Syrians, even if maybe they're doubting that at the moment. They've always, for so long they've been that. And I think really that it's a very dangerous decision that Ahmed al-Hajjari is doing here now. And my friends tell me that, you have somebody who wants to unify, even if we might not like the government, which is going to be, of course, a very conservative government.
Thank you, Dr. Schaebler.
But we have to sort of see that, at the moment, that is really, it's also a dangerous stance that al-Hajjari is taking here. And what I want to say is, it's not all the Druze who are behind him. I know a lot of people in the Jebel who are really not. So what I'm saying is, I really think, based on such a long, term history that the Druze have in Syria, I think that they will sort of, in the end, sort of amend and be, reintegrate themselves and sort of negotiate. I hope and I think they will do that, and then we just can hope.
You are muted, Said.
Sorry. Okay, I'll just make two comments. I'll try to be as quick as possible. I hope that Dr. Provence was still here, but maybe Dr. Joshua would fill in the vacuum of his absence, I mean. Now, the first is the question about the Syrian revolution, the relation between the Suwayda and the center. I think what is missing from all this discussion is how Sultan Pasha al-Atrash viewed Arabism or the Arab identity and even the Syrian identity. And from my studies, I thought, especially, and I benefit from Joshua's writings, is that while he identified with Arabism and the national identity, he do it in a cultural manner, meaning it's not ideology, it's Arabs valued freedom. And thus, to him, that doesn't contradict autonomy. And this is what is missing. The key of to understand Sultan Pasha is that he never, or in his view, autonomy and nationalism are not contradictory. If you go back, Arabs are like that. We didn't view an Arab state until the rise of Islam, and it was the Islamic State. And even in the Islamic State, it was hard to control the Arabs, the tribes. So why? Because they value freedom, and they had this autonomy. Every tribe has its autonomy. So that's, I think, one of the major elements that is missing from the discussion. And that's why I do not agree with what Dr. Provence said about the 1925 revolution. Historically, it started when the French pulled out all their promises about autonomy of the mountain. And they did measures that dismantled the autonomy of the mountain. That was the spark of the
Thank you, Said. You have one more? Okay, go ahead. Please, short.
The second is for Nawras and Mael. Two things that I hope they would consider in their paper, which I saw missing. One of them is there is no talk about why the mountain, Jabal Druze, wanted customary laws. This is, of course, a general Druze preference. Everywhere they prefer customary laws for their, especially in their personal status and their customs, social customs. But particularly in Mount Jabal Druze, there's no discussion about the element of the mode of survival. There, the Druze were always consistently living under the mode of survival. And this explains a lot of might explain a lot of customs. The second is they didn't separate between the religious aspects of the customs and the civil aspects of the custom. The Druze will always look to customary laws when it comes to personal status and religious things, and might adapt to civil laws when it comes to civil cases. So this separation is not clear in their presentation, and I hope they would.
Okay, thank you so much. Rami Abou Diab, please make your last comment as short as possible.
You're muted.
Muted.
Yes, concerning the dialogue between Sharaa and Suwayda, and especially Sheikh Hikmat al-Hajari, let's not forget that Sharaa didn't liberate Suwayda. Suwayda liberated by itself, and the first locality to have been liberated in the greater Damascus, in Reef Damascus, was Jaramana. So for this, in the geopolitical perception of Suwayda, al-Sharaa is not the liberator. It's someone who came from Idlib to Damascus. It's not really the big liberator. And the second one, al-Hajari asked to name a governor, a woman's governor. It was declined by al-Sharaa, and also a call for a national dialogue and a new constitution, and it was also declined by al-Sharaa. And then we saw what happened in March with the Halawi, and it reminded Druze what happened to them in Idlib. That's what created an important rejection of al-Sharaa. And at the end of the day, and here I will talk about a little bit of Charles Lister on Twitter, it's not between al-Sharaa and al-Hajari. It's between al-Sharaa and the people of Suwayda. The people of Suwayda defended the lands not in the name of al-Hajari, in the name of their particularism and of their own identity. That's my little comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's move to Professor Landis. If you have very short comment, please.
Well, I sympathize with what Saeed Abu Zeki had to say about Sultan Basha, because I think he did hold those two things, a nationalism, a patriotism, but he also had great misgivings about Quwatli and the Hizb al-Watani in general, because of course he had been a Shah Bandar guy. He'd also been close to the Hashemites, and he was in competition with these Damascenes who wanted to lord it over the Jebel Druze, and he wasn't going to have that. And he used the fact that he had been a leader, and he used the nationalist credentials all the time to say, you are not above me. You're not better than I am. And that's why that fight over Independence Day was so important, because Quwatli wanted Sultan Basha to come and sit at his right and show that he had submitted to Damascus. And Sultan Pasha said, no, you come to Jebel Druze, because we're the ones who liberated. We liberated ourselves in 45 before everybody else. We liberated ourselves in 50, in 26. And so he had to go get the Alawite to go and sit next to him during Yom al-Jala. But that was second best, and nobody, Sultan Pasha was really the person he needed at his side.
Thank you so much. Let's give a chance to Mael or Nawras to respond as well.
شكرا. الملاحظات بالنسبة للأستاذ سعيد. الواقع أنه العرف نحن بخلال الدراسة يعني فصلناه بشكل كثير دقيق، والفرق بين العرف المدني والعرف الجزائي. عملنا مقارنات بين مجتمعات بعيدة وقريبة حتى في العصور الوسطى، لمقارنة بين الدول الحديثة بالمعنى الغربي والدول الحديثة أو الدول بالمجتمع العربي. النتيجة أنه مجتمع السويدة تمسكه بالعرف كان تمسك مؤقت بسبب الفراغ القانوني. عدم وجود فراغ قانوني بيخلي مجتمع السويدة أقرب لدولة القانون، وما بيكون العرف هو سبب أو معيق مقارنة بمجتمعات قبلية ثانية كان العرف فيها أكثر قوة. مجتمع السويدة نسبة الغير المتدينين في أكبر من نسبة المتدينين، فمنشان هيك الصوت الأعلى هو للمجتمع المدني حسب الملاحظات اللي لاحظتها الدراسة. شكرا، هي كانت يعني إضافتي.
شكرا مائل. دكتور علاء الدين، بتحب تتفضل في كلمة نهائية؟ Last words for دكتور علاء الدين.
أتوجه بالشكر العميق لك دكتور رامي على هذا الجمعة الطيبة وبالفرصة للانضمام لهذا التجمع، والسادة المشاركين على هذه المحاور التي أغنت فعلا هذا النقاش الذي نحتاجه ونستطيع نتنور به. كلمة هي الدين لله والوطن للجميع تكررت في جميع المداخلات، ونضيف إليه اليوم ما يليق بزماننا الحالي، وهو العدالة للجميع وكرامة الإنسان. شكرا لكم جميعا، وشكرا دكتور رامي، شكرا لضيوف المستمعين.
Thank you so much, everybody, for this very lovely discussion and very informative that puts the history in context of the recent events and gives us the opportunity to understand better what's going on. I have prepared additional notes for ending this session, but we will skip that. We did not finish on time. We are a little bit late now. And also we want to give our language interpreter some time to rest. And for this reason, I'm going to delay the beginning of the next panel. Instead of starting in 15 minutes from now, we're going to start in 20 minutes. So our local time when we start would be 12:20. And in the Middle East, it's going to be 8:20 p.m. So see you in about 17 or 18 minutes. Thank you so much.